Trigger warning, this episode contains topics that may not be appropriate for all listeners.
So in my research for today's topic, I love newspapers.com. The phrase that I used was precocious puberty. In April 1840, the mention of the phrase was used in a newspaper in reference to a 4-year-old Vermont boy. He stood at 4 feet in height and weighed about 90 pounds, had a deep voice, and had whiskered cheeks and chin. And his friends were hoping to exhibit him to the public, specifically to scientists. Which, okay, 1840, all right.
Where was this again?
In Vermont.
Vermont.
Mm-hmm. And then in June 1869, it appeared to be a reference to Massachusetts being a mecca for it and puerile senility. So they were aware that these children were advancing quicker, and it was becoming a thing that was documented. In September 1885, a doctors' convention was held in Washington, D.C. The first paper discussed was entitled The Natural Hygiene of Childbearing Life. It was written by Dr. Busey, and it discussed the proper age for marriage and the potential injuries of premature marriages. He believed precocious puberty was on the rise in the U.S. So for 20-something years, less than 20 years, this has now been, hey, this is happening with our children. In October 1930, Dr. R.G. Hoskins, an endocrinologist of Harvard University, shared to a group of scientists information on the importance of glands in the body. He gave credit to the pituitary gland in turning children to adults. He stated the gland acts with a group of nervous mechanisms to control growth, sexual activity, and fat metabolism. The disease of overgrowth, gigantism, and also precocious puberty were products of the substances pouring from the gland. Inactivity of the pituitary gland was related to dwarfism and sexual infantilism. Infantilism. There we go. Sorry, English is hard.
Words are hard, girl. Words are hard.
In November 1934, hormones was the topic of discussion for Dr. Hans Lisser in California. Insulin was finally isolated in the 1930s and praised for its magical resuscitation in Addison's disease patients. That's now kind of also known as hypocortisolism, and it's oversupply. Its oversupply pointed as the culprit in causing precocious puberty. So we've gone from, hey, there's this thing called glands to, hey, it spits out some fluid, and now, oh my gosh, this is what this fluid is. So the understanding of development in people was going along smoothly. But on May 15th, 1939, a headline rocked international papers. 5-year-old Indian girl becomes mother. Now, I'm about to say a whole lot of names that are not necessarily English, so I'm going to do my best. Dr. Ippolito Larrabure, chief surgeon and director of Peru's Lima Maternity Hospital, said this was one of the strangest gynecological cases in the world. It was witnessed by 60 doctors, and the birth of a 5.96-pound baby boy occurred via C-section. Surgeons Dr. Gerardo Lozada and Dr. Alejandro Busalu performed the 35-minute operation from 9:03 a.m. to 9:38 a.m., delivering the baby declared to be in perfect condition to his mother, a child just over 5 years old. And you think, oh my gosh, surely she must be lying about her age, right? Her age was corroborated by the fact that she still had her baby teeth.
She gave birth to a 6-pound baby, and she probably only weighed like 40 pounds herself.
Right. She still had her baby teeth and stood no more than 3 feet 1 inch tall.
I'm sure you're going
Dr.
to answer
Larrabure
me.
stated there was no similar case to this. Okay.
Where were her parents?
Here.
How?
We'll get into it. Okay. Dr. Larrabure stated there were no similar cases to this, but a Colombian doctor, Dr. Restrepo, had reported a case of a vaginal birth by a child about 8 years old in 1938. Now, I went trying to find information on that 8-year-old and I could not find anything. So I'm not sure if it was just not documented or it might have just been like a scientific case that he personally knew about. So the situation began when 5-year-old Lina Medina was brought from Pisco, Peru to the care of Dr. Lozada at the Pisco Hospital. Through an examination, it was determined she had been the victim of a criminal assault. Her physical body had entered puberty when she was only 3 months old. Now, if I knew that my daughter was bleeding at 3 months old, and this is small village, neighborhood, but if I had enough knowledge to know that my baby was bleeding at 3 months old, I think I would have gotten a little bit of medical help sooner, but there's no telling what the financial situation was. They were in slums. So there's no telling what could have actually really happened. But your question is now being answered. Her mother believed her daughter was a victim of the evil eye, or perhaps had been possessed by a snake called Tiracha. Tiracha in Indian beliefs can impregnate women sleeping in the open air. Or what was reported in 1941 was that the people of her mountain village believed the child had bathed in the pool of birth. And it is believed that any virgin that bathed in that body of water would bear a child. Now that opens up questions for me is how many women, not sexually active women, were having babies in this village? Why was that a thing to know?
And would that be the second coming of Christ? Because that would be an immaculate birth.
I'm not sure. I'm not specifically sure what the beliefs foundations were for these people.
Oh, I don't mean them, because they more than likely were not
oh my gosh, you're having a baby from the water. But it opens up questions about the safety of these women, knowing that it's certainly not religious. But again, you have people that are raised with certain cultural beliefs, and so it's truth. The 5-year-old was unable to explain what had happened to her, and her parents were in disbelief up to the point of meeting their grandson. The 5-year-old gave her thanks reluctantly when given a doll almost the same size that she was. Lina was not informed that she had given birth. While she healed, an American promoter persuaded Lina's father to sign a contract giving him exclusive rights to handle Lina's affairs outside of Peru. So this man came and said, hey, I'm going to take your daughter from you who's just had a baby, and we're going to go and put her on tour or something. The Peruvian authorities were convinced that a stand had been reserved for Lina at the World's Fair in New York. Dr. Lozada immediately approached President Oscar Benavides about this, and deeming it a national disgrace, canceled the contract. This infuriated her father, sparking in him a hatred for the doctor and an attempted kidnapping of Lina. Lina and her son were kept at the maternity hospital under the custody of the state until Peruvian Supreme Court returned custody to them with the strict injunction that they vigilantly protect her morals. In March 1941, Mary Van Rensselaer Thayer claimed she had interviewed Lina, where she revealed she had begun losing her baby teeth. And also that she has a body as mature as a woman's, is as vain about her appearance as an adolescent girl, has a passion for feminine lingerie, and yet displays a normal 6-year-old attitude toward her son, Gerardo Alejandro. She has absolutely no maternal feelings, looks on Gerardo as her brother, and is correspondingly irritated when he disturbs her. Also reported was that she was a ward of the state protected from exploitation. Reported was, as her half-breed father watches, as a policeman guards, and as a nurse cares for her son, Lina Medina, the mother, spends her days drawing in her copybook. In May of 1941, it was reported that she and her son were living with her parents, who were peasant farmers in a slum. Jose Thomas Escalante was the Peruvian lawyer that represented the Medinas in a court battle against the state to return her. He, out of his pocket, was giving about 23 cents at the time. Now that's about $4.84 per day for Lina and Gerardo's food. In August of 1942, an article jovially stated there was a lifelike wax copy of The World's Youngest Mother at Coney Island. In newspapers in years following, several births to 10-year-old mothers revisited Lina's story briefly. In 1949, it was reported that Lina and her now 10-year-old son both attended the same school, and Gerardo had even learned to herd sheep from his grandfather. At this point, Lina was aware she was the boy's mother, but he believed her still to be his sister. Her father carried the resentment to Dr. Lozado for his part in overruling their desire to send the children abroad for exhibition in the hopes of reaching a fortune from those willing to pay to see them. In 1951, an article about a Johns Hopkins Medical School doctor, Dr. Emil Novak, has him quoted as saying, puberty may occur at an unbelievable age without the presence of any tumor. This group might be said to skip childhood completely. A special danger is that unlike the tumor group of precocious children, this group can become expectant mothers. Mentally, they tend to be bright, but not overly precocious. However, the sex instinct is present. The most careful psychological treatment is required to get these children safely over the danger period. And I don't know if it's just the wording of that is not comfortable to me, but I don't think that the sex instinct is a thing in children unless you make it a thing in children.
I am inclined to agree.
Okay.
I'm inclined to agree. And we're going to kind of talk about that here in a few minutes as well, about media influences on sexuality and, things like that. But like a lot of things were worded, before PC became a thing, before political correctness became a thing. And I think they worded things precisely how they intended them to sound.
That's probably true.
And I believe that if you think about the past, especially in places like Peru, in the mountains, even in the mountains here in the United States, in the rural areas here in the United States, there was a time in which like marriage and childbearing happened at astronomically early ages, as far as our, I guess, more modern thought process would like to make comfortable. Right. So there was a time, like I think my great grandmother had her first child at 12 or 13. Like, I mean,
so beautifully segueing into that, an article in 1953 titled Granny at 28 gave a competitive perspective on teen mothers and young grandmothers. Child marriages are not uncommon in America even today, and in some states, girls are allowed to marry before the age of 14. In fact, at that age, Mrs. Edith Ann Manbeavers of Waverly, Iowa, was 2 months ago suing her 21-year-old husband for divorce. The suit, including an application for custody of her 14-month-old son, had to be filed by her father because of her age. Going on to tell of Mrs. Eunice Johns of Tennessee, whose 1937 wedding at 9 years old to a 22-year-old man led to an outrage of people and him having to defend his home with a rifle. At the time of the publication, it was stated they were a very happy couple with 4 children. The oldest was a 10-year-old daughter that her father stated he had no intention of allowing to marry at that age. This is a direct quote from the paper. Don't want no strangers getting no ideas about my kid. In 1952, at 22, Lina was working at Dr. Lozada's private hospital in the administrative office. A journalist named Louis Leon traveled here to harass Lina on her life, ignoring her request to be left alone, going so far as to cause her to run to a corner of the office and a nurse demanding he leave. He then pursued Gerardo one morning on his way to school. The interrogation ended when he reached the school gates. Lina would want to marry a man named Gerardo in the 1970s and gave birth to a second son in 1972. Sadly, Gerardo passed away in 1979 from a bone disease. It's not clear if Lina is still alive or not, but she has never revealed the identity of Gerardo's father nor the circumstances of her pregnancy. And just to follow up, with medical advancements, we do now know that precocious puberty can be caused by tumors or growths on the ovaries, adrenal glands, pituitary gland, or the brain.
Right.
May include central nervous system problems if there's a family history of the disease or certain rare genetic syndromes. However, in many cases, there is no cause. It just happens.
I also want to say that, like, if people were, really concerned about who this now 80-year-old child's parentage is, with DNA testing, they could potentially learn of the person who, aided in the birth of that child. It sickens me to believe that someone um, would do something like that to a 5-year-old, first of all. Um, but I am disinclined to believe that she got impregnated because of a body of water. So, regardless of why she was able to not only carry to term, but give birth at less than 6 years old, the scarier part of that situation is how she got pregnant in the first place.
And that a known or a thought to be pool of water was causing other virgins to carry a baby.
Right.
So she is not alone in the sense that something was happening to women up there.
Right. Not even just women and children.
Women and
children.
Yes.
That. I don't
Correct.
care what.
Thank you for saying that. Yes. Women and
I
children.
don't care what decade that's in. That is horrific to happen to a 5-year-old. Like, rape isn't okay for any person of any age, of any gender expression.
Right.
But it's monstrous all by itself. But the level of monstrosity that it takes to do that to a child is absolute. It's evil. That is evil.
And that she did not even know how to, she did not know how to express to someone, even that she didn't know how to express what had happened to her. She didn't show fear towards a certain person or act a weird way. They thought that she had a tumor, that she just had this crazy tumor growing in her. And then they went to the hospital and realized, oh no, that's not a tumor. That's a baby.
That's a baby. That's a whole baby.
Yeah.
You have another human being inside you. And like, I'm from Kentucky. So there was, and I grew up in the 90s and 2000s, and I had some friends in high school who got preggers and gave birth in high school. But like, this girl literally grew up at the same time as her child. There's a bit of a difference between being 16 and pregnant and growing up with your child. She was no difference in age between my nephew and his little sister.
They went to the same school at one point.
That's what I'm saying. Like, they literally grew up together because they were less than 6 years apart. Like, that is just crazy to me. That's crazy to me. Wow. Fucking wow.
So,
Lina Medina.
There's that disgusting comment going around now. If it bleeds, it breeds.
That comes from the Bible.
Yeah. So
But that also brings up a very valid
5 years
point.
old, it was already bleeding for 5 years.
Right. That brings up another valid point. Like, for a woman to bear children, to conceive children, she must first have a menstrual cycle. Her body must be prepared to do said baby carrying, right? I mean, I'm not a doctor or a biologist. However, I'm pretty convinced if a woman is not having menstrual cycles, she can't get pregnant, right? So this child had been bleeding previously to conceiving this child. And that wasn't.
And she was 3 months old.
Oh, that was the same child that had been bleeding since she was 3 months old. And so that was the first the doctors had even heard of that, I guess, because like that would have been documented. And then they probably wouldn't have been like, oh, maybe it was the water.
But her mother apparently knew. Like, I don't know if it seems like it's a very stretch of an advancement to be able to look at a child and go, oh, you started menstruating year X. So I think somebody would have had to withhold that information. Oh, I think she started to bleed about 3 months old.
And did nothing with it.
So somebody knew. And so.
Right. And it's not just a little blood. Like, it's not like she just had a little trickle of blood. No, there is other things that happen during a menstrual cycle than just a little blood. So there would have been placental discharge. You know what I mean? There would have been more than just blood. So the fact that that wasn't a document, like that, I guess it must be my modern mind, because that just doesn't make any sense to me. That not a word.
My baby has blood in her diaper. Well, and it also goes to, the time, it goes to the time in history, and also, the
where they're from. Yeah, and they're in a native indigenous village, in the mountains of Peru. So that makes a lot of sense. And, we as Americans have an American mindset when it comes to, medical advancements and like medical care. And, even to this day, there are still areas in South America that are not modernized per se when it comes to things like medical care or anything like that. But still, like, since this hit such national news, international news, you would think there would have been some sort of an investigation by somebody in the village to figure out WTF had happened to that little girl.
You would think, but I did not find anything of it. All I know is that Dr. Lozada was actually I think he had the right concept of what had been going on. And when he heard that that little girl was possibly going to be taken and traveled around, he went to the president and said, right, this is what's happening. And the president said, oh, no, it's not.
we're not, the Americans cannot hear of this. Because we have big mouths. I mean, that's just kind of our thing. But that kind of leads me into part of my topic about, furthering this idea of babies having babies. I was going to talk about teen pregnancy and whatnot, because it was a very prevalent thing and still continues to be fairly prevalent to this day. We're talking ages 10 and up. We're going to focus more on like the high school age, though, I feel like, for my conversation, because these are people that are exploring their sexuality more often than not. And, some areas having no longer allowing their students to have sex education. A lot of the pregnancies are happening because of lack of resources and lack of knowledge, right? So let's get into it.
Direction. Information.
Right. Banning books and whatnot. So let's get into some facts about teen pregnancy real quick. 3 in 10 teenage girls will get pregnant at least once before the age of 20. That's, by the way, nearly 750,000 teen pregnancies in this country every year. Parenthood is the leading reason that teen girls drop out of school. More than 50% of teen mothers never graduate from high school. About 25% of teen moms have a second child within 24 months of their first baby.
Oh, that made my
less than 2% of teen moms earn a college degree by the age of 30. The United States has one of the highest teen pregnancy rates in the Western industrialized world. Are you shocked? I'm not shocked. In 2011, the teen birth rate in the United States fell to its lowest recorded in nearly 70 years of tracking teen childbearing. And to this day, we still see a decline. Back in 2008, the teen pregnancy rate among African American and Hispanic teens between the ages of 15 and 19 was 2.5 times higher than that of their white girls of the same age range. We're going to talk about that as well in a moment. 8 out of 10 teen dads don't marry the mother of their child. A sexually active teen who does not use contraceptives has a 90% chance of becoming pregnant within a year of their engaging in
Yeah.
sex. More than half of all mothers on welfare had their first child as a teenager. In fact, 2/3 of families begun by young, unmarried mothers are poor. Teens had fewer babies in 2010 than any year since the mid 1940s. It's it's in a decline. We are seeing a decline in teen births. There is some data that would suggest that teen, pregnancies as a general rule are in a decline as well. There's a lot of factors right now that they're looking into with all these new legislations about abortion and medical care, specifically for women and teenage, females, as it relates to the pregnancy and birth data, because there's two trends of data that they track when it comes to pregnancies, especially when it comes to teenagers. They track pregnancies, which includes things like miscarriages, abortions, pregnancy in general. Then they track births. They're recently starting to really get hardcore, into research on the abortion rates of teenage girls. But there's a lot of factors that go into that type of a conversation, especially now with all these regulations. But in 2020, the teen birth rate was 15.4 births for every 1,000 females between the ages of 15 and 19. So less than 3 years ago, 15.4 births occurred every 1,000 people of that were female between the ages of 15 and 19. Now that's down 8% from the year prior, but that's 75% down from the 90s. And just, because of the ages, 91.7% of these births occurred outside of marriage. Despite the decline in teen pregnancy and birth, the United States is still one of the highest in the Western world when it comes to teen pregnancy. That's crazy. All right, so there is, a disproportionate amount of pregnancy when it comes to race. It is a fact that, Black, Indigenous, and Hispanic teenage girls have a higher pregnancy rate. It's also documented that poverty is higher in those ethnicities as well. And, uh, I don't want to say the word wealth, but being poor does play a very large part on teen pregnancy.
Does religious also factor into that?
It can. And I have a list we're going to talk about that kind of affect childbearing. We're going to get into in a moment. But there are well documented links between adolescent childbearing and individual family and community characteristics. For example, adolescents who feel connected to and do well in school are less likely than other adolescents to have children. At a familial level, youth who feel connected to and supported by their families are less likely to have sex and therefore become pregnant. Among females between 15 and 24, the probability of having had birth before the age of 20 is higher for those mothers who gave birth as teens themselves and those mothers who have lower levels of education. In addition, the probability of having birth before the age of 20 is lower for those who live with both biological parents at or around the age of 14. And teenagers that have mentors and more connections to the community are less likely to engage in sexual activities and therefore are less likely to get pregnant. But teenagers that live in areas of high substance abuse issues, that have parents that have substance abuse issues, those types of things kind of springboard these teenagers into having sexual activity. And because of the lack of education and maybe lack of care, they aren't using contraceptives, which leads to this pregnancy issue in the first place. The links between teen childbearing and family planning and socioeconomic characteristics, as well as relatively high rates of adolescent childbearing among Black and Hispanic teens, can be attributed to largely and can be attributed to largely to inequities and access to family planning services information, differences in attitudes about contraception, teen pregnancy, and teen childbearing, and distrust of medical professionals due to experience with providers and some groups' history of mistreatment in the medical field. Professionals working with you should be aware of and acknowledge the historical reasons that disparities in adolescent reproductive health and childbearing exist in the United States. A lot of that goes back into the systemic racism we have in this country. You know, people of color tend to not have the same access to healthcare, same access to, education. And because of how previous generations have been treated by those professionals, are less likely to
Seek
actually
out.
seek out that kind of care in the first place. Why would you go somewhere where you know that you're not, valued or wanted or appreciated? You know what I mean? But getting back into a religious standpoint, there are religions that find contraceptives to be completely against their religion, and so that may play a part in teens getting pregnant. But at the same time, if those teenagers are in a loving home and if they feel loved and are connected to their religion, they're probably less likely to have sex in the first place. So, I mean, can religion play a part in teen pregnancy? Sure, it can, but does it on a large scale? Probably not so much, um, unless those teenagers aren't connected to their religion or their religious community as a whole. That connection to their religion is what stops a lot of the teenagers from having sex in the first place. So let's talk about some other data. Let's talk about social media, and well, media in general, um, when it comes to things that children watch and see. It's documented that sexually explicit or even topics that have underlying tones of sex lead more to sexual exploration in teenagers. So, being shown sex, teenagers are more likely to experiment with sex. So, the idea that, you know, um, media plays a very large part in teen pregnancy is a viable argument. But they have shows like 16 and Pregnant and Teen Moms. And on the surface, these shows, one would think, would cause a rise in teen pregnancy because they're being exposed to teen mothers. If they can do it, so can I. Well, the data actually suggests that shows like that actually helped with a decline in teen pregnancy. The timing of the introduction of MTV 16 and Pregnant is such that it might conceivably have contributed in some measure to the most recent very sharp decline. Ever since its introduction, various observers have made conflicting claims about the show's influence on teens. Some highlighted the fact that the show focuses on the difficulty of raising children at such a young age, have concluded that the coincident timing of the decline and the premiere of the show, that this types of shows have helped decline the rate that teens are getting pregnant. Um, Others argue that the show glamorizes teen pregnancy with its cast members essentially becoming media stars whose lives are followed in the tabloids well after the show airs. But the fact that these shows aren't being made anymore and the teen pregnancy rate is still declining kind of argues that whole media frenzy presence of the celebrity status of these girls and these families of teen parents. So I think that education is really, really important, and how the best way to reach as many people as possible with education is through media, through television, through social media like TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. There is still a disproportionate rate between, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color being pregnant at younger ages. But even in that community, teen pregnancy is on a decline. And I think a lot of, the cause of that is education. and the ways in which people are being educated now. But there are some things to think about, especially when it comes to, abortions, because that's not to say that every teen that got pregnant gave birth. There are still miscarriages, and teens have a pretty high chance of miscarriage in the first place. But, abortions did play a part in how many actual births happened.
Right.
And 25, and this is data from 2017, so it's a little dated. But for 25% of births ended in abortion for females under the age of 20. I didn't really find a whole lot of data breaking it down by age group so much, but 20 and younger, about 25% of the births in 2017 ended in abortion. While teens are a decreasing percentage of the population who get abortions, pregnant teens are more likely to get an abortion than older people. Relative to older people, teens are more likely to learn that they are pregnant further into the pregnancies. So this gets into the problem with the current abortion situation in the United States. Every state still has their own laws and procedures about when an abortion can happen, whether or not an abortion can happen, and how these things can play into people's lives. But all of them in general are making it much more difficult for teenagers to have access to A, medical care, B, safe and sanitary abortions and things like that. And we have to think about the fact that these 6 week, for example, birth, 6 week incubation, I guess that's the word I want to use, bans, like the heartbeat bill and things like that, is teenagers more often than not find out they're pregnant much later than their adult counterparts do. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Fear of talking to their parents, first and foremost, is a very huge concern when it comes to teenage pregnancy. Who wants to tell their parents that they're pregnant? Their fear of being kicked out, the fear of, broken parental relationships, all of those play a really large part. So a lot of
Violence.
teenagers, and yeah, abuse, violence, and all those types of things are legitimate fears, and that kind of prohibits a lot of teenagers from seeking help early and finding out early. And if you think about, when a lot of women discover they're pregnant in the first place, happens from morning sickness symptoms, missed menstrual cycles, or delayed menstrual cycles. And teenagers don't always have regular cycles, so it's not uncommon for them to miss one, or for them to be a couple of weeks late, because it's not calendar scheduled a lot of the times for teenagers. So they're finding out that they're pregnant later and later and later, which makes getting that type of care much more difficult in a lot of states.
As
Pregnant,
a woman, I will also explain, I'll also state this. You can have a late period, you can have a missed period because you sneezed wrong on a Friday night. There's
that.
There are so many forums. Am I pregnant? Do y'all think I could be pregnant? And it's like, I'm late by 6 days and I'm stressed out about a test. I didn't eat right. I held in my poop too long one day. I had a fever. I got sick. I had surgery. There are so many easy, simple, tiny little ways that you can cause yourself to be late or miss your period, that when it actually happens to a woman, it's like, unless you have on your mind, I'm worried that I might be pregnant, I should go buy a test, you might not necessarily think about it.
Right.
And in the case of like children, like there's no frontal lobe development yet.
Right. That doesn't happen until the mid-20s.
And so it's like, she might not realize that she's pregnant until it's way past obvious, until she's wearing baggy clothes and she's hiding it.
And she's preggers.
And she's
Yes.
preggers, and everybody knows it, but nobody is talking about it. But like, it is a terrifying situation to be in when you don't want to be pregnant. But, you know, as a teenager, and the thought of, oh, my period might be late, or, you know, it's usually clockwork. There's so much that files into it that's not physically related or sexually related. It's just your body's reaction to something. And then all of a sudden, oop, I'm going to hold back. My period is like, it's too soon. It's too soon. Can't go yet. Can't go yet. But when I found out I was pregnant both times, my body was like, hey, yo, you're pregnant. And it was like a breath of pee had hit the test and it was lit up. So I was lucky in that. And I'm also lucky that I survived teenage years without children.
Same.
Get pregnant.
Yeah.
But, you know, in that
there was an adventure in my life.
Trust to tell?
Right. You know, and that's something else to consider too.
To help you if it's not readily there, or if there's stipulations to it.
Yeah, and those stipulations, you know, come down to, you know, teens having more difficulty in accessing in-clinic or medication, chemical abortions or prescription-based abortions, I guess is how I want to word that. The Plan B pill, you know, there are other medications that can be prescribed to induce an abortion in early stages of pregnancy.
Plan B actually does not terminate a pregnancy. It will wipe out your system. But if it has already had implantation, it does not.
Oh, well, that's good to know. I mean, not that I am partaking in the forbidden fruit, as they say.
But just for future references.
And just for people that might be listening, Plan B is not going to stop that baby if the baby's there. Okay?
The baby's there.
It's there. One of the immediate consequences of
it's a good. Oh, I should have done that tonight.
Huh?
Go ahead.
Of this decision was increased physical distance to abortion providers, which, you know, limits access. How many teenagers are going to drive 2 hours away to the nearest clinic? You know what I mean?
States. How many people are going to travel states?
Right. And because that's something like that happened in Ohio. A 10-year-old girl got pregnant right after the abortion bans hit. And they had to take her to Indiana, which Penn's country hadn't had the bans yet, which I found to be weird as fuck. But she had to go to Indiana to get care because she was pregnant at 10 years old, and the people in Ohio had decided that she was going to bear that child. Are you kidding me? Although many abortion patients travel for care, teens often lack the necessary financial resources, especially in the lower income and rural youth. Even with parental support, accessing abortion out of state can require traveling for multi-day appointments, missing school, traveling with multiple family members if there isn't care provided for younger siblings, or spending multiple days away from home. Adolescents may have a harder time getting accurate information on abortion. Research suggests that adolescents' medical providers may have incomplete knowledge about medication abortion. And so it doesn't have to be a surgical procedure in a lot of situations. But, you know, the topic isn't about being pro or against abortion or pro-life or pro-choice. The argument is made that, you know, teen pregnancies are on the decline, teen births are on the decline. But what's going to happen with the births on a decline with the new legislation about their abortions? Are we going to then see a new increase of teen births because the access to medical care has been removed? And that's something that, you know, we need to think about and keep an eye out for, because there are consequences to these decisions, and not just for adults that can care for children or adults that, you know, want to get pregnant. Not a lot of adults do. I'm 37 and I never once wanted children, you know, and thankfully I'm a man, so I didn't have to have permission from somebody to get snipped. You know what I mean? But the fact of the matter is there is going to be repercussions because of these legislations, and the difference in a lot of aspects between an adult woman getting pregnant and a teenage girl getting pregnant is that teens will still need ongoing and stable support to not only navigate pregnancy, but navigate parenthood, and then into navigate into being functioning adults on top of all of that. Because life doesn't stop once you give birth. That 16-year-old is going to turn 17. That 14-year-old is going to turn 15. You know what I mean? They're still going to have to become functioning adults in society and still have to figure out how to grow and mature into adulthood, because you don't just magically become an adult at 18 either. You know, your brain continues to develop well into your mid 20s. Your frontal lobe doesn't stop developing until like you're 25 or 26. So these teenagers who are now having more having access taken away from medical care, abortion services, even basic prenatal care in a lot of areas has been removed because Planned Parenthoods have been shut down, and clinics of that nature that may also offer abortions have been shut down. And a lot of teenagers get their care from places like Planned Parenthood or the free clinics, and things like that. And that type of legislation to remove that type of care is going to cause some ramifications.
I think that teen mortality rate is going to need to start being added to it. And it's not because
absolutely
it's not because childbirth is going to kill them, but they might not necessarily be looking for an abortion because that's their number one desire. They might be looking for an abortion because they don't have a healthy situation to bring a child into, and then there's the concept of put the baby up for an adoption or try to
with the other hundreds of thousands of children that are waiting to be adopted.
Exactly. Like go open one of their doors and see how many babies were put up for adoption. One of the greatest things that I think that's ever been invented are the baby drop boxes.
Agreed. Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, that's fantastic, because it's a little bit of logic in the sense of this is a safe place for this person to put their baby. No questions asked. That's fantastic. Mm-hmm. But I think that there's a lot of church and state that are super blending right now in ways that they don't need to be super blending. And like growing up in Alabama, I'm not sure how it was in Kentucky, but in Alabama, I did not think that abortions were an okay thing until like adulthood. And it was like, oh my, holy smokes.
Well, I have to say that
like this is not what I was understanding.
Right. And I'm male, so like a lot of my thought process wasn't on abortions or pregnancy. And let's be all the way transparent, like even when I was diving into the Garden of Eden, I wasn't worried about pregnancy per se. You know what I mean? And I was worried about getting my rocks off. I was 13, 14, 15, and getting the girl pregnant was not a concern. And I think that's, privileged as fuck because I'm male and I didn't have to have that concern. You know what I mean? But like at the same time, when I was growing up in Kentucky, I wasn't paying attention to abortion, anything.
Yeah.
I know that I'm from a really big city in Kentucky. I'm from Louisville. We had Planned Parenthoods and neighborhood places, which I'm not sure if everyone has a neighborhood place, but they're kind of like a free clinic, discounted clinic, neighborhood resource. They were kind of a lot of things all wrapped up into one, but we had them all over the place. Pretty much near any high school, there was a neighborhood place, oftentimes inside the high school. And there was a Planned Parenthood in the realm of high schools too. Like they weren't, but that was also, I graduated almost 20 years ago. So lots have changed in 20 years. But back then, Planned Parenthoods were everywhere. I could name 6 because, they also did other things besides abortions. They did STD care. And when I started getting into my adventures in my adolescence, I would go to the Planned Parenthood and get tested. I'd go to the neighborhood place and get tested. So I knew there was access. So that might have further reinforced my lack of concern because there was access and abortions were legal. I don't remember like the stipulations that had to happen in order for a woman or a girl to get one, but I knew that they took place. Um, but I can speak from a privileged place of not having that concern. So, but we do have to think about this idea that if teens are forced to carry pregnancies to term and therefore then become parents, because as we know, adoption is rare and funneling children into a system that's not removing children from said system is not going to help the system in the first place. We have to expect additional negative physical health, mental health, effects in relationships and economic outcomes for these teenagers and their children, which will increase poverty in these areas. Because as we've already talked about, poverty breeds poverty breeds poverty. And if we're forcing teenagers to carry children and give birth to children without the care that is required to take care of children, they're going to be in a cycle of poverty. Most teen moms are single. You know what I mean? And not every teenage girl has wealthy enough parents that can afford to take care of said teenage girl and said teenage girl's kids into infinity. So at some point, that teenage girl is going to have to become an adult mother and take care of said child in the best way she can. And that often is broke in the slums, and the disproportional risks to BIPOC people that are already in those situations in the first place. It only breeds it to get further and further and further into risks of just economic problems. Mental health is a thing. Physical health is also a thing, but the goal should be not to keep people in poverty. And I think this is one way that people are going to get stuck in poverty is forcing them to bear children that they can't take care of.
And what also is a factor too is like you hear about people that are on welfare and that like there's some kind of topic of discussion where people that are on welfare keep having babies, welfare babies. That's not really how it works. With welfare, you get just enough. And just enough. And yet you can't make any better for yourself. You can't have income that could provide. That's the point of it is you are broke and you can't afford this. So we're going to provide you just enough to cover it. So it's like when you hear about like child support and like somebody paying child support to the my brain's gone, the custodial parent. And they're like, I bet they go out on the town and they're partying and buying new shoes. Not really. Because what you're paying into that, whatever it is that you're covering the cost of, didn't wait until you paid. That had to be paid immediately. So again, broke.
Right. Absolutely.
Formula costs ridiculous amounts of money.
I don't even have children.
I was lucky that I had. Go ahead.
But like I've seen some prices on diapers and formula and I'm like, no, I absolutely don't want children. That's enough. Thank you. That was a deterrent for me, beyond the fact that it's much more difficult for me to conceive children because of who I copulate with. But the sheer fact of the price is just outrageous for these things. And WIC covers it a lot for, parents with young children, and food stamps covers a lot of it. And, welfare programs and social programs do help. But the fact of the matter is, there is not an infinite amount of support. And the more we force people to bring people into this world is a problem. And, I do have speculations on why they're forcing pregnancy, and it has nothing to do with wanting more people. It's wanting more white people. And it is a means
it's a control.
Mhm. Um, but my beliefs
It's
on
to
the
control the
reason for the
masses.
banning of gold, yeah, it's my belief on the reason for forcing this to bear children is not really relevant to the conversation. Um, but I would also just like to throw in the fact that the majority of the welfare recipients in this country are not BIPOC people. They are in fact white folks. And so this idea that welfare is a BIPOC issue is most assuredly not. Like it
I
is
got
not
WIC.
a BIPOC issue.
I got WIC.
Right.
And if I didn't have WIC, I would
when I was young, when I was young, we had food
have
stamps,
suffered.
we had WIC, we had, all of that. And my at the time when I was young, my dad was in the military, so it wasn't like, we were, disenfranchised and not working. My father was in the Air Force, and we still needed food stamps. And then when my sister was born, there was a lot of health problems with my sister. And not to make a very long conversation, or an even longer conversation, but we still had food stamps, we were still getting WIC. And, you know, those are programs that are there for that reason. But we can't force people to to have children they cannot afford because these programs exist. That's not a reason to force a 14-year-old girl to give birth. That's not a reason to force a 25-year-old woman to give birth. That's not a reason to force anyone to give birth. But
But also
teenagers,
including the woman that has the pregnancy that she wanted so bad, and that baby is not going to survive
that that
due to something. When that baby comes out, that baby is not going to live on. That should not be imposed on anyone to have to go through carrying your baby that, as soon as you welcome it, is going to die. That
right.
is, I can't imagine that kind of pain. I can't imagine that heartbreak, that stress, and that sentiment. And there was a baby, I think his name was Baby Milo, but his mother was forced to carry this baby to delivery, knowing that he was not going to survive. And I think he gasped for air for 99 minutes before he died, because some lawmakers said, hey, we know better than you do.
There are laws also, Erica, that not to make that situation, not to lessen the severity of that situation. But there are some abortion laws that are in place right now that a woman who has a fetus in her body that is not viable, she has to wait until she's almost septic before they can take that child out of
Yes,
her.
it has to be a life and death.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And by life and death, it's not this will kill you if you keep the pregnancy. It has to be actively killing you before they will remove said
Yes,
child,
you have to
said
show
fetus
signs that your
from
demise
your
is
body.
coming. Right.
Yeah.
And
Before they can take that
that's so
fetus out of your
disgusting.
body.
It is disheartening, and thank goodness the people that are making these laws have never experienced that kind of pain. Thank goodness that they are so ignorant to what the actual brutality is of the situation. Because I wouldn't want to wish that on anybody, but I sure do wish that we had some people in office that actually had a brain, that actually were empathetic to go and talk to somebody to see what is really happening, other than just standing up and talking to other lawmakers.
That's a human being that you're trying to murder.
Okay, let me put it to you this way. I would rather have the person that I've known for X amount of years than them die and a baby that
Absolutely.
is probably not going to thrive still be here.
Even beyond that, to take it to, because I'm dark and I'm Slytherin. But I would much rather my friend that I've known for 30 years live than a clump of cells I've never met, never associated with, and give not a single solitary fuck about. Let's just be all the way real.
And to be all the way real too, if that woman doesn't want to have that baby, then that's her want. If there is something that she says, I need to have an abortion, it is nobody else's business to know.
Besides hers.
Besides
Hers and her doctors. Her and her doctors.
hers or whomever is birthing this child. So not to just singular a gender, but their business.
Right. But that's it. That is it. And we can talk about the reasons that a person being forced to give birth is devastating to that child in more ways than just economically. The the child welfare system in this country is a fucking joke. The Child Protective Services is a joke. The foster care system, there is more abuse in the foster care system than there is pretty much anywhere else in a child's life, next to the church. Let's be real. And, when you force someone to bring a child into this world that they didn't want in the first place, are they going to love and care for that child? I think the fuck not. There are two choices. They're going to abuse that child, or they're going to put it into a system where it is going to be abused. That is the reality of the situation when it comes to forcing people to give birth to children they don't want or can't take care of
Or
in
they
the
might
first.
try their best and it's still not good enough for the welfare of that person. That child
Period.
is gonna suffer.
Period.
There's not enough help. There's not enough
And
people that care, that want to do right. You are just forcing this person to have a baby, to either take that baby away, to either cause that baby to have delays or
Mhm.
malnourishments. So the whole point is just the argument of, I just want this person to be forced to have this baby.
Period. And there are state legislators that are arguing free lunch programs in school as if they should be why should we take care of these kids? Because you're forcing people to have them. That's why. And my biggest argument to pro-life motherfuckers is, if you are going to force someone to give birth, you should then be forced to help them care for said person they had to give birth to. If they had no choice in the matter, and they had no choice but to give birth, you, as the government, should then be helping take care of that child because you forced it to be here in the first place.
And let's just to solidify the point, not everyone that gets pregnant was trying to get pregnant, wanted to get pregnant, or it was even in their possible mindset to have sex.
We're not even talking about consensual pregnancies. Well, or consensual sex. Babies happen because of rape too. And pregnancies happen because of rape and incest and, all of these horrific crimes against people that are able to get pregnant. And the right to not have to carry that monstrosity with them for the rest of their lives physically is disgusting to me. They're already going to have those emotional and mental bruises forever. But then to have to look at the face of another human being that was caused by that monstrosity of an act is cruel and unusual punishment, in my opinion. Why would I want someone who was raped to have to look at potentially the face of their rapist? I look just like my parents, so it's not inconceivable that the product of a rape would look just like the person that put it there. And to force a birth giver to stare at this person in the face every day is monstrous.
And it's so sad that like to hear that out loud, somebody would possibly think, oh my gosh, how could you ever think about your baby that way? Hello. It's because people have free will, free thought, and it's not controlled.
But the fact of the matter
Not
is, those
everybody that doesn't want
scars
to have a
are
baby that
there,
gives
and
birth to a baby is going to hate that baby.
but
It's trauma.
those trauma and scars and triggers, and people don't understand that a person that resembles the man that raped you enough to trigger you to think about it and focus on it and remember it every single day, that's abuse.
And to also add, I think, if I'm recalling correctly, there was a story in the news years ago about a woman who had raped a teenage boy and gotten pregnant with his baby, because guess what? Your body reacts. It can be unintentional. But she got pregnant when she raped him, and she sued him for child support of a baby that she chose to have. She raped a
Oh, yeah.
teenager and made him
Oh,
pay.
yeah. And I bet she fucking won.
And then there was some scenario of a girl that got pregnant through rape, and the man that raped her was able to get child visitation or custody or something of that nature.
Mhm.
Because why not allow this person to still have that control over somebody?
There are legislation being worked on in states like Texas that if a person is raped and conceive a child and the rapist is in prison, right? That rapist family can sue if she gets an abortion. Or they get an abortion or he gets an abortion. Like if an abortion occurs, the family of the rapist can sue the person that got the abortion. Are you kidding me? And it's legal. Mm, 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 mm. Anyway, so that's a little off the topic of babies having babies, but we had to get on the soapbox for a second. Ooh, girl. Anyway, are we going to tease next episode's information, or are we just going to leave them hanging again?
You'll just have to stay tuned for the next episode.
Thanks for joining us. We love y'all, sweet pumpkins. Stay safe, and remember,
To fix your mouth.